The waters of the hippo enclosure rippled with unusual intensity as Ruby paced back and forth in the pool, her enormous body creating waves that splashed against the viewing glass. Harold West had worked at Riverside Wildlife Sanctuary for many years, but he'd never seen the massive female hippopotamus so agitated. "Something's not right," he muttered, pressing his weathered hand against the observation glass. Beside him, Fiona Jackson, the sanctuary's head veterinarian, nodded in agreement, her dark eyes narrowed in concentration. "She's not due for another 2 weeks," she whispered, more to herself than to Harold. "But I've been monitoring her hormones and they've been irregular." The morning sun had barely risen over the sanctuary's lush landscape, casting long shadows across the viewing area, where the two stood watching Ruby's restless movements. Most visitors wouldn't arrive for hours, a small mercy considering what might be unfolding before them. Ruby let out a deep, rumbling groan that seemed to vibrate through the water, through the glass, and straight into Harold's chest. He'd helped raise her from when she arrived as a young hippo, watching her grow into the magnificent creature she was today. After all these years, he could read her moods and behaviors better than anyone. "Call Petra," Harold said firmly. "And the emergency team. This isn't a drill." Fiona didn't hesitate, immediately pulling out her radio while keeping her eyes fixed on Ruby. "This is Dr. Jackson at the hippo enclosure. I need Petra and the birthing team here immediately. I repeat, immediately." Harold's gaze never left the pool. Ruby was special among hippos, one of the last of a rare genetic line that had nearly vanished due to poaching and habitat loss. Her pregnancy had been celebrated throughout the conservation community, a glimmer of hope for a subspecies teetering on the edge of extinction. But something felt wrong. Harold couldn't explain it, but after decades working with these powerful creatures, he'd developed an intuition that rarely misled him. "What are you feeling, old girl?" he murmured, his breath fogging the glass slightly. Behind them, the doors to the viewing area burst open as Petra Goodwin, the sanctuary's director, strode in with purpose, her tall frame moving with the efficiency of someone accustomed to emergencies. "Talk to me," she demanded, joining them at the glass. "Early labor, I think," Fiona replied, her voice tense with professional concern. "But her behavior is unusual." Petra's expression remained calm, but Harold noticed the slight tightening around her eyes. Ruby's pregnancy wasn't just important to the sanctuary, it represented years of Petra's work in hippo conservation. The sanctuary had invested heavily in this breeding program, both financially and emotionally. "The team is assembling at the service entrance," Petra said. "We've closed the surrounding paths to visitors. How long has she been like this?" "About an hour," Harold replied. "Started with restlessness, then the pacing. Now this." As if on cue, Ruby emitted another deep, reverberating call that made the observation windows vibrate. She submerged herself completely, then resurfaced with a massive splash that sent water cascading over the enclosure walls. "That's not normal," Harold said, his voice tight with worry. Fiona was already moving toward the service door. "I'm going in to get a closer look. We might need to intervene." "Absolutely not," Petra countered firmly. "Not yet. Hippo births are dangerous enough when they're calm. With her this agitated." Harold knew she was right. A female hippo in distress could be one of the deadliest animals on the planet. Nearly 2 tons of muscle and bone, capable of crushing a human without effort. Even Ruby, usually gentle with her handlers, would be unpredictable now. "There's something else," Harold said quietly, his eyes fixed on Ruby as she circled the pool. "Look at the way she's moving. It's almost like she's protecting something." The three of them watched in silence as Ruby continued her aquatic patrol, moving in tight, deliberate circles around one particular section of the pool. Occasionally she would stop, lower her massive head beneath the surface, then raise it again with that same distressed call. "The underwater viewing area," Petra suddenly realized. "We might see better from there." The three rushed down the corridor to the lower level, where visitors could view the hippos from beneath the waterline. The space was empty this early in the morning, the blue glow from the pool casting rippling patterns of light across their faces as they pressed against the thick acrylic panels. What they saw made them freeze in collective shock. Through the water, Partially obscured by Ruby's massive body as she continued her protective circling, they could just make out a small, dark shape moving independently in the water. "That's impossible," Fiona whispered, her scientific mind struggling to process what her eyes were seeing. "She's already given birth," Petra stated flatly, her usual composure momentarily shattered. Harold felt his heart constrict with a mixture of wonder and fear. But there's no way. Joey would have noticed. The cameras would have. They watched in stunned silence as Ruby gently nudged the tiny calf toward the surface for air, then back into her protective circle. The baby hippo, impossibly small next to its mother's enormity, moved with surprising strength through the water. The night cameras were down for maintenance, Petra realized aloud, the implications sending a chill through the room. Between 2 and 4 a.m., she must have given birth during that window. Fiona pressed her hand against the glass, her medical training already assessing what she could see of the calf. "It looks strong, active. That's a good sign." "But why didn't any of the overnight staff notice?" Harold asked, the question hanging heavy in the air. Before anyone could speculate further, Ruby suddenly became completely still in the water, her huge body tensing. Then, with a deliberate movement that seemed impossible for her bulk, she shifted position to reveal not one but 2 small forms swimming beside her. "Twins," Petra breathed, the word barely audible. Harold felt the world tilt slightly beneath his feet. Twin hippo births were vanishingly rare, and when they did occur, survival rates were desperately low. In the wild, a mother hippo could rarely produce enough milk for 2 calves, and in captivity the complexities of supporting such a birth were daunting. "That's why she's been so protective," Fiona realized. "She's been hiding them." "But why?" Harold asked, his voice barely above a whisper. As they watched, Ruby corralled both calves into the shallowest part of the pool, where a gentle slope would allow them to rest partially out of the water. With exquisite gentleness that belied her enormous size, she positioned herself between her babies and the viewing window, her small eyes seeming to stare directly at the humans observing her. Harold had worked with animals long enough to know the dangers of anthropomorphizing, of assigning human emotions and reasoning to animal behavior. But in that moment, meeting Ruby's gaze through the thick glass, he couldn't shake the feeling that she was deliberately communicating with them, that her concealment of the twins had been intentional. "She doesn't trust us," he said softly, the realization both painful and illuminating. "Something happened that made her hide this from us." Petra straightened up, the momentary shock giving way to the decisive leadership for which she was known. "We need a full assessment of both calves immediately. Fiona, assemble your team. Harold, I want you to review every second of footage from the past week. Something happened to make her distrust her handlers, and we need to know what." "And the twins?" Fiona asked, already mentally preparing the interventions that might be necessary. Petra's gaze remained fixed on Ruby and her miraculous calves. "For now, we observe. Ruby's clearly been caring for them successfully for several hours at least. Unless you see signs of distress in either calf, we don't intervene yet." As Fiona hurried off to assemble her veterinary team, Petra turned to Harold, her expression grave. "This isn't just unprecedented, it's impossible. Twin hippo births with both calves surviving the birth itself." She trailed off, clearly struggling to process the implications. "There's something special about these calves," Harold said quietly, "and Ruby knows it." Above them, the sanctuary was beginning to wake up. Soon, news of the surprise birth would spread, bringing attention, excitement, and inevitable complications. But for now, in the blue-tinted quiet of the underwater viewing area, Harold and Petra simply watched in wonder as Ruby tended to her secret miracles. What they didn't yet realize was that these twin hippos, born under mysterious circumstances and already defying the odds, would soon change everything about their understanding of these ancient creatures. The twins would challenge scientific assumption, uncover hidden truths within the sanctuary itself, and ultimately force everyone involved to confront difficult questions about the relationship between humans and the animals in their care. For Ruby had indeed been keeping secrets, but they were far bigger than anyone at Riverside could possibly imagine. As the morning progressed, Riverside Wildlife Sanctuary transformed from a place of quiet routine to the epicenter of controlled chaos. News of Ruby's surprise delivery spread through the staff like wildfire, and by midday, a carefully selected team of veterinarians, zoologists, and caretakers had gathered in the administration building's largest conference room. Harold slipped into the meeting a few minutes late, having spent hours reviewing security footage from the hippo enclosure. The dark circles under his eyes testified to his exhaustion, but there was an intensity in his gaze that caught Petra's attention immediately. "Now that we're all here," Petra began, standing at the head of the long table, "let's get straight to the facts. Sometime during the night, Ruby gave birth to twin calves approximately 2 weeks earlier than her expected due date. Both calves appear to be female, both are active and nursing. Dr. Jackson will provide the medical details." Fiona stood, her clinical demeanor masking the excitement Harold knew she must be feeling. "Based on our observations through the viewing areas, both calves appear to weigh approximately 35 to 40 pounds, smaller than average, which is to be expected with twins, but not dangerously so. Their skin coloration is normal, movements coordinated, and both have successfully nursed multiple times." She clicked a button on her tablet, projecting several images onto the wall screen, long-range photos taken with zoom lenses to avoid disturbing the new family. "What's remarkable is that both are not only surviving, but thriving in these early hours. In the handful of documented hippo twin births, usually one calf is significantly weaker or doesn't survive delivery. These two are nearly identical in size and vitality." Thomas Ravinsky, the sanctuary's research director, leaned forward with obvious excitement. His accent thickened, as it always did, when he was particularly animated. "This is unprecedented data for our research on the species. We must begin documentation immediately. The genetic implications alone—" "We need to discuss another matter first," Petra interrupted, nodding toward Harold. "Harold has been reviewing our security footage and has discovered something concerning." All eyes turned to Harold, who stood slowly, feeling the weight of what he was about to share. "The security cameras in the hippo enclosure were officially down for maintenance between 2 and 4 a.m., he began, his deep voice somber. "That's what the logs show, and that's what we all believed. But I've discovered this was deliberately falsified." A murmur of confusion rippled through the room. The system was manually overridden at 1:47 a.m., and the cameras continued recording but were redirected to a private server rather than our main security feed. I was able to recover the footage. He connected his own tablet to the display, and the screen filled with night vision footage of the hippo pool. The timestamp showed 2:22 a.m. "Watch," he said quietly. The footage showed Ruby in obvious labor, but she wasn't alone. A figure moved at the edge of the pool, a human shape, moving with confidence around the enclosure. Several people gasped as the figure approached the water. "That's impossible," someone whispered. "No one would be stupid enough to approach a hippo in labor." But the figure did exactly that, kneeling at the pool's edge as Ruby approached. There was no fear in either the human's movements or the hippo's response. Instead, there was a shocking familiarity. "She knows this person," Fiona stated in disbelief. As they watched, Ruby gave birth to the first calf. The human figure, impossible to identify in the grainy night vision footage, appeared to be checking the baby, perhaps even helping guide it to the surface for its first breath. Minutes later, when the second calf appeared, the person repeated this assistance. "Who authorized this?" Petra's voice was deadly quiet. "Who put themselves at risk like this, and who has been entering the enclosure without authorization?" Harold paused the footage. "That's where it gets more complicated. I ran the figure through our biometric identification software. According to our systems, that person doesn't exist." The silence in the room was absolute. "Explain," Petra demanded. "The height, weight, and gait parameters don't match any employee in our database. Whoever this is has access to our security systems, knows our protocols, and has apparently developed some kind of relationship with Ruby, one strong enough that she tolerates their presence during her most vulnerable moment." Thomas cleared his throat. "Perhaps it is one of the night staff who has been, how do you say, moonlighting, building extra trust with Ruby without authorization?" "I've spoken with every member of the night staff," Harold countered. "None of them claim any knowledge of the birth before the morning announcement. And Ruby wouldn't trust just anyone this quickly. This relationship would have taken months to develop. So we have an intruder, Petra concluded, her voice tight with controlled anger. Someone who has been accessing our facility, interfering with our animals and compromising our security. Or, Fiona suggested quietly, we have someone who saved those twin calves. All eyes turned to her. Look at the footage again, she urged. That's not interference, that's assistance, expert assistance. Ruby is allowing this person to help position the calves for their first breath. In the wild, hippo calves sometimes need to be nudged to the surface by their mothers. With twins, Ruby might not have been able to manage both. This person knew exactly what to do. Harold nodded slowly. Which suggests professional knowledge. Specialized knowledge. A heavy silence fell over the room as the implications sank in. Someone with expertise, access to their systems, and a relationship with Ruby had deliberately hidden their actions from the sanctuary's official records. We have two priorities, Petra finally declared. First, the health and safety of Ruby and her calves. Second, identifying this individual and determining their motives. Until we know who they are and what they want, we proceed with maximum security protocols. No one outside this room is to know about the security breach or the unauthorized assistance. She turned to Fiona. What's your recommendation for the calves? Continued observation, minimal intervention. Ruby is caring for them appropriately. If that changes, we'll need to be ready to step in, but for now, Mother knows best. And the announcement to the public? Thomas asked. Petra considered this carefully. We announce the birth of twins. It's too significant to keep quiet, and the conservation implications are enormous. But we say nothing about the unusual circumstances or the security concern. As the meeting continued, outlining protocols and assignments, Harold found his thoughts returning to the mysterious figure in the footage. Whoever they were, they had shown extraordinary skill and an almost supernatural connection with Ruby. What troubled him most wasn't the security breach, but the question of motive. Why would someone with obvious expertise and good intentions toward the animals hide their identity? What were they afraid of? Looking around the room at his colleagues, people he'd worked alongside for years, Harold couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that the answer might be closer than any of them wanted to admit. The twins' unexpected arrival had brought a miracle to Riverside, but it had also exposed cracks in the sanctuary's foundation, cracks that might run deeper than anyone realized. The sanctuary had been transformed overnight. News vans lined the entrance road, reporters clamoring for footage of the miracle twins. Inside the administration building, phones rang constantly as Petra navigated interview requests, donor calls, and inquiries from research institutions worldwide. Harold, however, had retreated to the quiet of the security office, scrolling through months of archived footage, searching for any sign of their mysterious visitor. His eyes burned from hours of staring at screens, but determination kept him going. You should get some rest, Fiona said, appearing at the doorway with 2 steaming cups of coffee. She looked as exhausted as he felt. Can't, Harold replied, accepting the cup gratefully. Every time I close my eyes, I see that figure by the pool. They're out there, Fiona, probably watching us right now. Fiona pulled up a chair beside him. The question is whether they're a threat. To the hippos? Doesn't seem like it. To the sanctuary's reputation, if this gets out, absolutely. On the main screen, Ruby and her calves rested peacefully in the shallow end of their pool. The twins had already developed distinct personalities. The firstborn more adventurous, constantly exploring the boundaries of her mother's protective circle, while the second stayed closer to Ruby's side, observant and cautious. They're perfect, Fiona murmured, watching the calves. Developmentally normal, good appetites. It's extraordinary. Harold nodded, though his attention had shifted to a different screen where he was reviewing footage from 3 weeks earlier. Wait, he said suddenly, pausing the playback. There. The nighttime footage showed a brief shadow moving across the service area adjacent to the hippo enclosure. Most people would have dismissed it as nothing, but Harold's trained eye recognized the deliberate movement of a person trying to avoid detection. 3 weeks ago, he said, making a note of the date and time. And here, He pulled up another clip from 2 weeks before that. Another shadow, same posture, same path. They've been coming regularly, Fiona realized, leaning closer. Harold nodded grimly. And long before Ruby was due. This isn't opportunistic. It's planned. They spent the next hour compiling instances of the mysterious visitor, establishing a pattern. Appearances approximately every third night, always between 2 and 4 a.m., always entering through the same service corridor. Tonight would be the next visit based on the pattern, Harold calculated. If they're still following the same schedule, even with all the extra security and media attention, that's what we're going to find out. Meanwhile, in the public viewing area, Thomas was conducting the first official observation of the twins, narrating his findings to Petra, and a select group of donors who had been granted special early access. Notice the unusual eye color, he explained, pointing toward the calves. Most hippo calves have dark brown eyes, but these twins appear to have a lighter amber tone. This could be indicative of their rare genetic lineage. The small group of wealthy supporters murmured appreciatively, though Petra suspected few of them could actually distinguish the eye color of the calves from this distance. Still, their financial support was crucial, especially now. "When will they be named?" asked Elizabeth Merriweather, the sanctuary's most generous benefactor. The elderly woman leaned heavily on her ornate cane, but her eyes were sharp with interest. "We're considering a public naming contest," Petra replied diplomatically. "It would increase engagement and potentially bring in additional donations." Elizabeth made a dismissive sound. "Nonsense, these are significant births for conservation. They should have dignified names, not whatever internet popularity would produce." Thomas nodded enthusiastically. "I have prepared a list of suitable scientific names that honor their genetic heritage." "What does Harold think?" Elizabeth interrupted, her gaze finding the security office window where Harold's silhouette was visible. "He's known Ruby the longest." Petra and Thomas exchanged a quick glance. Elizabeth's regard for Harold was well known, as was her tendency to overrule Petra's decisions when it suited her. "Harold is actually quite busy with security matters," Petra said smoothly. "The twins' arrival has generated considerable public interest, and we're taking extra precautions." Elizabeth's expression suggested she wasn't fooled. "I'll speak with him myself, then. I've doubled my annual donation, Petra. I believe that entitles me to hear all perspectives on these remarkable births." Before Petra could respond, a commotion from the hippo pool captured everyone's attention. The firstborn calf had ventured to the far edge of the enclosure, and Ruby was shepherding her back with gentle nudges from her massive snout. The baby seemed to protest, slapping the water with surprising force for such a small creature. "Strong-willed," Elizabeth commented with approval, "like her mother." Thomas was frantically taking notes. "This early display of independent behavior is most unusual. Typically, hippo calves remain in constant physical contact with their mothers for the first—" He was interrupted by a delighted gasp from the group as the second calf suddenly submerged and then breached the water's surface in a perfect miniature version of an adult hippo's territorial display, mouth wide open, small teeth visible, before splashing back down. "Impossible," Thomas whispered, his scientific certainty visibly shaken. "That behavior doesn't develop until they're much older." Petra felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air-conditioned viewing area. These calves weren't just rare, they were exhibiting behaviors that defied scientific understanding of hippo development. Combined with the mystery of the unknown visitor, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something important, something just beyond their comprehension. Elizabeth seemed to sense her unease. The older woman moved closer, speaking softly so only Petra could hear. "There's more happening here than science can explain, isn't there, dear?" Her knowing look made Petra wonder, not for the first time, just how much Elizabeth Merriweather understood about the true workings of Riverside Sanctuary. As dusk settled over the sanctuary, Harold made his preparations. He had shared his plan with only Fiona and Petra. They would monitor from the security office, while he positioned himself near the service corridor, where the mysterious visitor was likely to appear. "This is ridiculously dangerous," Fiona had protested. "What if they're armed?" "Then I'll finally get to use those self-defense classes the sanctuary paid for," Harold had replied, with a wry smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Now concealed in the shadows near the hippo enclosure's service entrance, Harold checked his equipment one last time. A small radio earpiece connected him to Fiona in the security office. His tranquilizer gun, normally used only for medical emergencies with the animals, was loaded with a dose calibrated for a human adult. He hoped he wouldn't need it. "Any movement on the cameras?" he whispered into his mic. "Nothing yet," Fiona's voice came through clearly. "But there's something odd happening with Ruby. She's acting expectant, like she's waiting for something." Harold shifted slightly to get a better view of the pool. Fiona was right. Ruby was unusually alert, positioned near the edge of the enclosure closest to the service entrance. The twins were nestled in the shallow water behind her, occasionally making soft sounds that carried through the night air. For the next hour, Harold remained motionless, his joints protesting but his focus unwavering. The sanctuary had gone quiet, the daytime sounds of visitors and staff replaced by the ambient chorus of insects and distant animal calls. "Movement at the south perimeter," Fiona suddenly whispered in his ear. "Someone just disabled the sensor on Gate 12, exactly like in the previous footage." Harold's pulse quickened. "They're coming in the same way, even with all our extra security." "Either very confident or very foolish," Fiona responded. "They'll reach your position in approximately 3 minutes if they follow the same route." Harold readied himself, his hand resting lightly on the tranquilizer gun. Part of him, the part that had dedicated his life to protecting these animals, felt a fierce determination to confront this intruder. But another part, the one that had watched the gentle interaction between the stranger and Ruby during the birth, felt an unexpected hesitation. The minutes stretched like hours as Harold waited, every sense alert for the slightest indication of approach. But the expected footsteps never came. "Fiona," he whispered urgently. "Where are they?" Her response was tinged with confusion. "I don't understand. They should have passed the East Storage Building by now, but we've lost visual." A sudden splash from the hippo pool drew Harold's attention. Ruby had moved to the very edge of the enclosure, her massive body half out of the water, facing toward the outer perimeter, away from where Harold was hidden. "Something's wrong," he muttered, a sinking feeling in his gut. "They've changed their route. They know we're watching." As if confirming his suspicion, a soft, melodic whistling floated through the night air, coming from the opposite direction of the service corridor where he was positioned. The tune was strange, almost haunting, unlike anything Harold had heard before. Ruby immediately responded to the sound, emitting a low rumbling call that seemed to vibrate through the ground beneath Harold's feet. "They're at the north observation area," Harold whispered urgently to Fiona. "I'm moving to intercept." "Harold, wait for backup," Fiona protested, but he was already moving, keeping to the shadows, as he circled around toward the north side of the enclosure. The whistling continued, changing in pitch and rhythm, almost like a language. Ruby and the twins were now all alert, responding with their own vocalizations in what seemed like an impossible communication. As Harold approached the north observation area, he slowed his pace, careful to make no sound. The whistling was louder now, definitely coming from just ahead. He readied the tranquilizer gun and moved forward. The observation area was designed with a jutting platform that extended over the water, giving visitors the sensation of being directly above the hippo pool. Standing at the edge of this platform, silhouetted against the moonlight reflecting off the water, was a figure. Not the same figure from the security footage. This person was smaller, with a distinctly different posture. As Harold watched from the shadows, the figure knelt down, reaching toward the water where Ruby and the twins had gathered below. The scene was so bizarre, so contrary to everything Harold knew about hippo behavior, that for a moment he simply stared in disbelief. Ruby was allowing this person, this stranger, to touch her calves, gently stroking their heads as they raised them from the water. "I've got you on camera," Fiona's voice came through his earpiece, tight with tension. "That's not the same person, Harold. This is someone different." The realization hit him like a physical blow. Not one intruder, but two. Not an isolated incident, but a coordinated effort. Harold stepped forward from the shadows, raising the tranquilizer gun. "Don't move," he commanded, his voice carrying clearly across the quiet night air. The figure froze, then slowly straightened up, hands raising slightly in a gesture that wasn't quite surrender. They still hadn't turned to face him. "Step away from the animals and turn around slowly," Harold continued, moving closer but maintaining a safe distance. For a moment, he thought the figure might comply. Then, with a fluid movement that spoke of practiced familiarity with the surroundings, they vaulted over the safety railing at the edge of the platform. "No!" Harold lunged forward, certain he was about to witness a deadly plunge into the hippo pool, an act that would normally be suicidal given Ruby's protective state. But instead of a splash and the inevitable violent response from Ruby, he watched in astonishment as the figure landed with cat-like grace on a narrow maintenance ledge that ran along the pool's edge, a feature invisible from most angles and known only to sanctuary staff. Before Harold could react further, the figure darted along this ledge and disappeared into a drainage tunnel, an access point that had been sealed off years ago according to the sanctuary's blueprints. "They're escaping through the old drainage system," Harold reported to Fiona as he raced after them, but he already knew it was futile. The tunnel network beneath the sanctuary was extensive, dating back to when the facility had been a water treatment plant many decades ago. By the time he reached the tunnel entrance, the figure was long gone, leaving behind only a lingering echo of that strange, melodic whistle. "Harold!" Fiona's voice in his ear was tight with controlled urgency. "You need to get back here now." "I lost them," he acknowledged bitterly. "They knew the tunnel system." "It's not that," Fiona replied. "Elizabeth Merriweather is here, with Ruby's original medical records from before she came to Riverside, records none of us have ever seen." Harold froze. "What do they show?" Fiona's voice dropped to a whisper. "According to these files, Ruby isn't just a rare subspecies. She's the result of a breeding program that was never made public. A program Elizabeth funded privately many years ago." "What kind of breeding program?" Harold asked, though something in his gut told him he already knew the answer, and it would change everything they thought they understood about Ruby and her extraordinary twins. "The kind that officially doesn't exist," Fiona replied. "Come back to the main building. Elizabeth says there's something we all need to know before our mysterious visitors return." As Harold made his way back, he cast one last look at Ruby and her calves, peaceful again in their pool. The hippo's small eyes seemed to meet his across the distance, holding a wisdom and awareness that suddenly seemed far deeper than he had ever recognized before. Whatever Elizabeth Merriweather was about to reveal, Harold suspected it would shake the foundations of everything he thought he knew about the creatures he had dedicated his life to protecting. The atmosphere in Petra's office was tense as Elizabeth Merriweather settled into the chair across from the desk. Despite her advanced years, she sat straight-backed and dignified, her hands folded atop her ornate cane. Harold, Fiona, and Petra exchanged uneasy glances as Elizabeth opened an aged leather portfolio containing yellow documents. "I suppose I've kept this secret long enough," Elizabeth began, her voice steady. "What you witnessed tonight, Harold, has forced my hand." She withdrew a photograph and placed it on the desk. It showed a much younger Elizabeth standing beside a man in a lab coat. Between them was a juvenile hippo that Harold immediately recognized as Ruby. "That's Dr. Leonard Parker," Fiona said, leaning closer. "The pioneer in animal cognition research. He disappeared during a field expedition nearly 20 years ago." Elizabeth nodded. "Leonard didn't disappear. He went into hiding to protect his life's work, and to protect Ruby." Harold felt a chill. Protect her from what? From those who wouldn't understand what she represents. Elizabeth's gaze was unwavering. "Ruby is the result of the most successful cross-species communication study ever conducted. Leonard discovered that certain hippopotamuses possess cognitive abilities far beyond what science has acknowledged, particularly in their capacity for memory, problem-solving, and communication." Petra looked skeptical. "Are you suggesting Ruby is some kind of super-intelligent hippo?" "I'm stating it plainly," Elizabeth replied. "Leonard developed a method to identify hippos with these advanced traits and established a breeding program to preserve the genetic line. Ruby was the most promising subject, her cognitive abilities tested at levels that would have upended our understanding of animal intelligence." Harold recalled Ruby's behaviors over the years, her uncanny ability to recognize patterns, her problem-solving when enrichment puzzles were placed in her enclosure. her seeming understanding of human interactions around her. "The whistling," he said suddenly. "The person tonight was communicating with her." Elizabeth's eyes widened slightly. "You heard it? The tonal language Leonard developed." Fiona leaned forward. "You're saying Dr. Parker created a way to actually communicate with hippos?" "With special hippos like Ruby, yes. It's a modified whistling language that works with their vocalizations and cognitive patterns. It took Leonard years to perfect." "And the mysterious visitors?" Petra pressed. Elizabeth sighed deeply. "That would be Natalie and Ben Parker, Leonard's children. They've continued their father's work in secret." Harold sat back, pieces falling into place. "They've been coming to check on Ruby throughout her pregnancy. They helped deliver the twins." "Precisely." Elizabeth pulled out another document, a genetic chart. "But there's more. The twins are extraordinary, even by Ruby's standards. Leonard's final research suggested that the cognitive traits would intensify with each generation. The twins represent the next evolutionary step in this remarkable lineage." Fiona studied the chart. "This is why they exhibited such advanced behaviors at birth. They're not just rare, they're cognitively exceptional." "But why all the secrecy?" Petra demanded. "Why not conduct this research openly?" Elizabeth's expression darkened. When word of Leonard's initial findings leaked, certain pharmaceutical companies became very interested, not in communication or conservation, but in studying these hippos' brains for compounds that might be developed into cognitive enhancement drugs for humans. They wanted to dissect them, Harold realized with horror. Exactly. Corporate interests offered millions for tissue samples. When Leonard refused, there were threats. That's when we fabricated his disappearance and moved Ruby here, disguised as a routine conservation transfer. "And the sanctuary has been her safe haven ever since," Petra concluded. "With you as her silent guardian." Elizabeth nodded. Riverside was chosen specifically because of its exemplary security and dedicated staff. She looked directly at Harold. "Particularly you, Harold. Leonard and I knew you would protect Ruby even without knowing why she was special." Harold felt the weight of this trust, like a physical pressure. "So these past years, Natalie and Ben have been checking on her, making sure she's safe. And continuing their father's research, Leonard taught them the whistling language from childhood. They communicate with Ruby more fluently than he ever could." "Where is Dr. Parker now?" Fiona asked. Elizabeth's gaze dropped to her hands. "Leonard passed away last winter. His children promised to continue protecting his legacy and Ruby." A heavy silence fell over the room as they absorbed these revelations. "What happens now?" Petra finally asked. "We have media attention, researchers wanting access, and two extraordinary calves that apparently represent an evolutionary leap in hippo intelligence." "That," came a new voice from the doorway, "is what we need to discuss." They all turned to see a woman standing in the office doorway, tall and slender, with intelligent eyes that immediately reminded Harold of the photograph of Dr. Parker. Behind her stood a bearded man, who Harold recognized as the figure from the birth footage. "Natalie and Ben Parker, I presume," Petra said, rising from her chair. Natalie nodded. "We apologize for the intrusion. Aunt Elizabeth told us about this meeting." "Aunt?" Fiona questioned. "Honorary title," Elizabeth explained. "I've known them since birth." Ben stepped forward. "We've been monitoring your security systems. When we realized you'd discovered our presence, we knew it was time to make contact." "You hacked our security network," Petra stated flatly. "Actually, we designed it," Natalie corrected. 5 years ago, when the sanctuary upgraded, we work as consulting wildlife security specialists under different names. It gave us a way to ensure Ruby's protection." Harold studied the siblings carefully. "Why reveal yourselves now? You could have continued your secret visits." "Because of the twins," Ben replied. "They're developing even faster than our father's research predicted. Within months, their abilities will become impossible to disguise as normal hippo behavior." Natalie nodded. "We need to create a controlled revelation of their cognitive abilities, one that ensures their protection from exploitation." Elizabeth tapped her cane on the floor for emphasis, "Which is why I've called an emergency meeting of the Sanctuary's Board of Trustees for tomorrow morning. I'm proposing the establishment of the Parker Institute for Interspecies Communication, housed right here at Riverside." Harold looked between them. You want to bring Dr. Parker's research into the open? Isn't that dangerous? Less dangerous than continuing in secrecy, Natalie replied. With the twins' birth making headlines, scrutiny will intensify. Better to control the narrative than have someone else discover the truth and exploit it. The Institute would have ironclad protections, Elizabeth added. My legal team has prepared governance documents that prioritize the animals' welfare above all research objectives. And my foundation will provide an endowment that ensures financial independence. Petra looked skeptical. This is a lot to process. You're telling us that we've been harboring hippos with near-human intelligence, and now you want to announce this to the world. Not near-human, Ben corrected. Different, but equally valuable. That's the point. Our father's research wasn't about finding animals that think like humans. It was about recognizing and respecting how they think in their own way. Fiona had been reviewing the research documents. These cognition tests are remarkable. If accurate, Ruby processes certain types of information more efficiently than humans do. Spatial memory, pattern recognition and emotional processing, Natalie confirmed, and the twins show signs of even greater capabilities. Harold had remained quiet, processing everything. Finally, he spoke. I'd like to hear them communicate with Ruby. I need to see it myself. Ben and Natalie exchanged glances. We can arrange that, Ben agreed. Tonight, after the sanctuary closes to visitors. Under the canvas of stars, they gathered at the edge of the hippo pool. The night air was cool and still, the sanctuary quiet, except for distant animal calls. Harold, Fiona, and Petra stood back as Natalie and Ben approached the water. Elizabeth watched from a bench, her face serene in the moonlight. Ruby emerged from the deeper water immediately, the twins following close behind. There was clear recognition in her eyes as she approached the Parkers. Ben began the whistling communication, a hauntingly beautiful series of tones that rose and fell in complex patterns. Ruby responded with her own sounds, the deep rumbles and softer whuffing noises, forming what Harold now realized was a structured response. She's asking about the strangers, Natalie translated quietly, nodding toward Harold and the others. We're explaining that you're friends who know about her special abilities now. The exchange continued, with the twins occasionally adding their own higher-pitched calls. The communication had a rhythm and structure that became increasingly apparent. This was no simple animal training, but true two-way communication. Now we'll demonstrate her cognitive abilities, Ben said. He removed a small waterproof board from his backpack and placed it at the pool's edge. On it were various symbols. Ruby, can you show us which pattern continues the sequence? He whistled, pointing to a row of geometric shapes. Ruby studied the board, then deliberately touched her snout to one of the symbols, the correct continuation of the pattern. That could be training, Petra said, though her voice held wonder rather than skepticism. Try this, Harold suggested, stepping forward. He rearranged the symbols into a new pattern that neither Ben nor Natalie had seen. When asked the same question, Ruby considered the new arrangement carefully before correctly selecting the next logical shape. Extraordinary, Fiona whispered. Even more remarkable was when the twins approached the board. Without prompting, they studied the pattern and each correctly identified different aspects of the sequence. They're learning from observation alone, Natalie explained. Their cognitive development is accelerating beyond even our projections. As the demonstration continued, Harold felt a profound shift in his understanding of the creatures he'd worked with for so many years. He'd always respected Ruby's intelligence, but had never imagined the depth of awareness behind those small, expressive eyes. What will you name them? He asked suddenly. Natalie smiled. That's Ruby's decision. She's chosen sounds for them that roughly translate to seeker and dreamer in our language. Perfect, Harold said softly. The morning sun bathed the sanctuary in golden light as the Board of Trustees emerged from their emergency meeting. The vote had been unanimous. Riverside would partner with the Parkers to establish the Institute with strict ethical guidelines and protections for Ruby and her calves. There will be challenges ahead, Elizabeth told Harold, as they watched visitors beginning to gather at the hippo enclosure. Not everyone will understand the importance of what we're doing here. But it's the right thing, Harold replied. These animals deserve to be recognized for who they truly are. Natalie and Ben joined them, now wearing official Riverside staff badges. Their days of secret visits were over. "We're installing the new communication station today," Ben said. "We'll begin with basic demonstrations for the public next week." "And Ruby? Is she ready for this new chapter?" Harold asked. Natalie smiled. "She understands more than you might think. She's known all along that this day would come. In fact, she's been preparing for it." "What do you mean?" Fiona asked, approaching with Petra. "The twins' advanced behaviors weren't just nature. Ruby has been teaching them," Ben explained. "She's been preparing them to help bridge the communication gap between our species." As if on cue, Ruby surfaced in the pool below, the twins playfully circling her massive form. She let out a deep, resonant call that echoed across the water. A sound Harold had heard countless times before but now understood carried meaning and purpose. "What did she say?" he asked. Natalie's eyes glistened slightly. "She said, 'Now we can truly see each other.'" In the months that followed, the Parker Institute for Interspecies Communication transformed Riverside. Carefully managed public demonstrations showed Ruby and her growing calves communicating, solving problems, and displaying their remarkable intelligence. The scientific community initially responded with skepticism, but as research papers were published and independent verification confirmed the Parkers' findings, acceptance grew. Ruby and her calves became ambassadors for a new understanding of animal cognition. For Harold, the greatest reward was the deepening of his connection with Ruby. Learning the basics of the whistling language allowed him to communicate directly with her for the first time. Simple exchanges that nevertheless bridged a gap he had never even fully recognized existed. "She remembers the first day you came to work with her," Natalie told him one evening, as they watched Ruby teaching her calves a new problem-solving technique. "She says you spoke to her with respect even then, when everyone else just saw a dangerous animal." Harold felt humbled by this revelation. "I always knew she was special. I just didn't know how special." The Institute's work expanded to identify other animals with advanced cognitive abilities, not just hippos, but various species that showed promise for communication. Each discovery reinforced Dr. Parker's revolutionary hypothesis. Intelligence in the animal kingdom took many forms, most of which humans had failed to recognize simply because we expected it to mirror our own. Elizabeth watched these developments with quiet satisfaction. Her decades-long protection of Ruby had led to this moment. A transformation in how humans understood and interacted with the animals sharing our planet. The twins grew rapidly, their abilities developing in ways that continually surprised even the Parkers. They began teaching other hippos modified versions of their communication, spreading the abilities through the social group. It became clear that Ruby's lineage might represent not just a scientific curiosity, but the beginning of a new chapter in hippo evolution. 1 year after the twins' birth, Riverside hosted a special evening event to celebrate the anniversary and the Institute's accomplishments. As the sun set over the sanctuary, visitors gathered to watch a demonstration of the communication system that had now been refined and expanded. Harold stood at the pool's edge with Natalie and Ben, while Fiona and Petra guided the assembled guests. Elizabeth sat in a place of honor, her health more fragile now, but her eyes still bright with purpose. Ruby and her twins, now officially named Seeker and Dreamer in scientific publications, but still called by their hippo sounds by those who spoke their language, approached the platform where symbols had been arranged. Instead of the usual demonstration, however, Ruby initiated something new. She made a series of calls and whistles that caused Natalie to gasp softly. "What is it?" Harold asked. "She's telling a story," Natalie translated, her voice filled with wonder. "The story of how humans and hippos began to truly understand each other. She's creating an oral history for her children and their children." As Ruby continued her narrative, occasionally assisted by the twins who added their own elements, Harold felt the profound significance of this moment. This wasn't just communication across species. It was the sharing of perspective, of history, of meaning. "She's talking about you," Ben whispered to Harold at one point. "Her about how you watched over her all these years, without knowing her full nature but still treating her with dignity." Harold felt tears prick at his eyes as he watched this magnificent creature, once thought to be merely a dangerous animal in need of protection, reveal herself as a thinking feeling, being with her own understanding of the world and her place in it. When Ruby finished her story, there was a moment of profound silence among the human observers. Then Elizabeth, who had listened through a translation headset, slowly rose to her feet. With dignity and deep emotion, she began to applaud. The others joined, the sound swelling through the evening air. Ruby raised her massive head, looking out at the humans with those expressive eyes that now everyone could recognize contained wisdom, memory, and understanding. In that moment, Harold knew that their work had just begun. There would be challenges ahead, ethical questions, scientific debates, the ever-present concern for the animals' well-being. But a door had been opened that could never be closed again. As twilight deepened into night, Harold stayed behind after the others had gone. Sitting quietly at the edge of the pool, he used the simple whistles he had learned to ask Ruby a question that had been on his mind. "Are you happy with what we've done? With people knowing about you now?" Ruby's response came in gentle rumbles and soft calls that he could now understand. "Truth is always better than hiding. My children will live in the light of understanding, not the shadows of fear." As if to confirm this, Seeker and Dreamer surfaced nearby, their small eyes reflecting the stars above. Harold nodded, understanding at last that the true miracle at Riverside wasn't just the birth of extraordinary twins, or even the revolutionary communication breakthrough. It was the simple, profound revelation that we had never been alone in our capacity for thought, memory, and meaning. Ruby and her kind had been there all along, waiting for humans to learn how to listen. Thank you for joining me on this journey into the world of captivating stories. I trust you found today's narrative as engaging as I did. If you enjoyed this exploration into fascinating and compelling narratives, kindly indicate your appreciation by liking this video. Are you watching on mobile? Show your appreciation with a double tap for hype. For more captivating stories and journeys into the heart of compelling storytelling, please subscribe to the channel and activate notifications so you don't miss a single upload. Your thoughts and interpretations are most welcome. Please share your perspectives on today's story in the comments below. And if you believe others would find this content engaging, please consider sharing the video with your network. Until our next journey into the world of captivating tales, I bid you farewell.